One day, they're everything. They text back instantly. They light up when they see you. They care. Then suddenly, it's like a switch flips. Cold, distant, gone. No fight, no warning, just silence. If you've ever wondered why someone becomes emotionally distant overnight, or why you do this without even realizing it, listen closely. This isn't random behavior. Psychology shows it's a silent self-protection response. And once you understand it, you'll never see relationships the same way again. Let's talk about the psychology of people who get emotionally distant suddenly. The reality check. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Pulling away isn't about cruelty. It's not always abandonment, and it's rarely about you. When someone suddenly goes cold, they're not necessarily falling out of love or losing interest. What's actually happening is far more complex, rooted in survival mechanisms that date back to our earliest experiences as human beings. Be honest with yourself for a second. You've probably been on both sides of this. You've felt the confusion when someone you cared about suddenly went cold, and if you're brave enough to admit it, you've done this too. You've withdrawn from someone without fully understanding why, leaving them wondering what they did wrong. The truth is, emotional distancing is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in human relationships, and once we understand what's really happening beneath the surface, everything changes. The trigger point. What happens before the distance? Before someone pulls away, there's always a trigger. It might not be obvious. It might not even be rational, but it's there. Psychology identifies several common triggers that activate the distancing response. The first is perceived vulnerability overload. When someone starts feeling too close, too seen, or too exposed, their nervous system can interpret this intimacy as a threat. Yes, you heard that right. The very closeness they wanted suddenly feels dangerous. This happens because deep emotional connection forces us to confront our fears of rejection, abandonment, and unworthiness. When you let someone in completely, you're also letting in the possibility of being hurt completely. For some people, that risk becomes unbearable, and their brain hits the emergency brake. Another major trigger is emotional overwhelm. Maybe they're dealing with stress at work, family issues, or internal struggles they haven't told you about. When life feels chaotic, some people's instinct isn't to reach out, it's to retreat. They pull back not because they don't care, but because they're already drowning and can't handle one more emotional demand, even if it's just the expectation to show up and be present. Then there's the activation of old wounds. Something you said or did might have accidentally triggered a memory or pattern from their past. Maybe their ex used to say something similar before betraying them. Maybe their parent was loving one moment and cruel the next, teaching them that closeness equals pain. These triggers can be so subtle that even the person experiencing them doesn't consciously understand why they suddenly feel the need to create space. The attachment theory explanation. Here's where attachment theory becomes essential to understanding emotional distance. Attachment theory, developed by psychologist John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, explains that our early relationships with caregivers create templates for how we relate to others throughout life. These patterns become our attachment styles. People with avoidant attachment styles are the most likely to become suddenly emotionally distant. If they grew up with caregivers who were inconsistent, dismissive of emotions, or simply not available, they learned that relying on others is dangerous. They learned to handle everything alone. They learned that showing need leads to rejection. So when a relationship starts feeling too intimate, too dependent, too vulnerable, their old programming kicks in. Distance feels safe. Distance feels like control. Distance feels like survival. But here's what makes this complicated. People with avoidant attachment often desire connection just as much as anyone else. They're not emotionless robots. They're scared humans who learned that closeness comes with pain. So they get close, they start to care, and then their nervous system screams danger, and they retreat. On the other side, anxiously attached people might also create distance, but for different reasons.
They might pull away as a test to see if you'll chase them, to confirm that you really care. Or they might distance themselves preemptively, convinced that abandonment is inevitable, thinking, "I'll leave before you can leave me." Understanding attachment styles doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it does help us see that sudden emotional distance is rarely about the present moment. It's about patterns formed years, sometimes decades earlier.
The self-protection mechanism. At its core, sudden emotional distance is a self-protection mechanism. It's the psychological equivalent of an animal playing dead when threatened. Psychologists call this deactivating strategies. When someone feels threatened by intimacy, they unconsciously employ tactics to reduce emotional engagement. They might stop texting as frequently. They become vague about plans. They withdraw physical affection. They create busy schedules that leave no room for connection. These behaviors aren't calculated manipulations. They're automatic responses. The person pulling away might not even fully realize they're doing it. They just know something feels off, something feels too intense, and they need space. The fascinating part is that this protection mechanism often activates right when things are going well. You'd think people would distance themselves when relationships are rocky, but it's actually the opposite. The better things get, the more some people panic. Because good things can be lost. Good things make you vulnerable. Good things require trust. And for someone with deep-seated fears about relationships, that's terrifying. This is why you might notice someone pulling away right after a meaningful conversation, a wonderful date, or when you both said something that made the relationship feel more serious. It's not that they didn't mean what they said in that moment. It's that afterward, their protective instincts kicked in, whispering, "This is dangerous. Shut it down." The fear beneath the distance. What is someone really afraid of when they pull away? First, fear of abandonment. Even though it seems contradictory, many people who distance themselves do so because they're terrified of being left. Their logic goes like this: if I don't get too close, it won't hurt as much when they inevitably leave. If I protect my heart now, I won't be destroyed later. Second, fear of inadequacy. They might be pulling away because they don't feel good enough for you. Maybe they're comparing themselves to your ex, your friends, or some imaginary standard they think you have. Rather than risk you discovering their flaws and rejecting them first, they reject the connection first. Third, fear of losing themselves. Some people distance themselves because they're afraid that getting too close means losing their identity. Maybe they've been in relationships before where they compromised too much, where they became someone they didn't recognize. So now, when a relationship starts feeling serious, they panic about losing who they are. And finally, fear of repetition. If they've been hurt before, betrayed, cheated on, abandoned, manipulated, they might be pulling away because everything feels too familiar, even good familiar. Their brain is scanning for signs that history is about to repeat itself, and sometimes it finds danger even when there isn't any. The impact on the other person. Let's talk about what this does to the person being distanced from, because that pain is real and valid. When someone suddenly becomes emotionally distant, it triggers our own attachment wounds. If you have anxious attachment tendencies, this behavior can send you into a panic. You might start overthinking every interaction, wondering what you did wrong, trying desperately to fix something you don't understand. You might experience what's called protest behavior, texting more, reaching out repeatedly, trying to force closeness because the distance feels unbearable. But here's the cruel irony. The more you chase someone who's pulling away for self-protection reasons, the more threatened they feel, and the further they retreat. Being on the receiving end of sudden emotional distance can also trigger profound self-doubt. You question your worth, your judgment, your perception of reality. Just days ago, everything seemed fine. Now you're wondering if you imagined the connection entirely. This confusion is compounded by the fact that the person distancing themselves often can't or won't explain what's happening. They might not understand it themselves, or they might fear that explaining their need for space will hurt you or make things worse. So they just withdraw, leaving you in an information vacuum where anxiety and insecurity thrive. Why they can't just explain it. You might be thinking, why don't they just communicate? Why not say, I'm feeling overwhelmed and need some space? Because emotional distancing often happens below the level of conscious awareness. The person pulling away might genuinely not know why they feel different. They just know that something that felt right now feels suffocating. That someone they wanted to talk to all the time now feels like too much. Additionally, many people who engage in this behavior learned early that expressing needs leads to rejection or punishment. So even if they do understand they need space, they don't have the vocabulary or the courage to say so directly. It feels safer to just create distance through actions rather than risk a conversation. There's also shame involved. When you're pulling away from someone who's been nothing but good to you, there's guilt and confusion about your own behavior. It's hard to explain something that doesn't make logical sense, even to yourself. How do you tell someone, I care about you, which is why I need to get away from you? The pattern and the cycle. Here's the devastating part. Emotional distancing often becomes a pattern that repeats across multiple relationships. Someone gets close, feels scared, pulls away. They create distance until they feel safe again. Then they come back, reconnect, the relationship deepens, and the fear returns. They pull away again. This is sometimes called the push-pull dynamic, and it can last for years if the underlying issues aren't addressed. For the person doing the distancing, this pattern reinforces their belief that relationships are threatening. Each time they pull away and feel relief, their brain registers distance equals safety. Each time they come back and start feeling anxious again, it confirms closeness equals danger. For the person experiencing the distancing, the pattern can become addictive in its own painful way. The intermittent reinforcement, sometimes they're close, sometimes they're distant, creates one of the most powerful psychological bonds. You become hooked on the good moments, always hoping the person will stay this time, always trying to earn consistent love. Breaking this cycle requires awareness from at least one person, usually both. Can it be healed? The question everyone wants answered. Can someone who suddenly becomes emotionally distant change? The answer is yes, but it requires something difficult. Self-awareness and a willingness to do the uncomfortable work of examining their patterns. For the person who distances themselves, healing starts with recognizing the pattern, noticing when the impulse to pull away arises, getting curious about what triggered it, understanding that the discomfort of intimacy is not the same as actual danger. Therapy, particularly approaches focused on attachment and trauma, can be transformative. Learning to sit with vulnerability instead of running from it. Developing the capacity to communicate needs directly. Understanding that needing someone doesn't make you weak and that letting someone in doesn't mean you'll be destroyed. For the person being distanced from, your work is different but equally important. You need to understand that you cannot fix someone else's attachment wounds with enough love, enough patience, or enough perfection. Their healing is their responsibility. You can support them, you can maintain your boundaries, you can communicate clearly about what you need in the relationship, but you cannot do their inner work for them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and allow them space to figure out what they need, while also protecting your own heart from repeated cycles of closeness and withdrawal. Conclusion. Emotional distance isn't a character flaw. It's not proof that someone doesn't care. It's survival. It's a sign that someone learned somewhere along the way that protecting themselves was more important than risking connection. If you're someone who pulls away, understanding this pattern is your first step toward healthier relationships. You're not broken. You're not incapable of love. You're just carrying wounds that need attention. If you're loving someone who pulls away, remember that their distance isn't a reflection of your worth. You can be the most wonderful person in the world and still not be able to break through someone else's walls. That's not failure. That's just reality. And if you're watching this because you recognize yourself in both descriptions at different times, welcome to being human. We all have moments when we pull away. We all have fears about intimacy. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness, it's compassion, it's the courage to keep showing up, even when it's scary. Emotional distance is a language. Once you understand what it's really saying, you can decide how to respond. With patience, with boundaries, with love for yourself and others. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. And remember, understanding the psychology doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. It just means seeing the full picture before deciding what comes next. Please like and subscribe the channel for more content.